Thanks so much, Matt, and thanks for the invite. So as Matt mentioned, I oversee the team that implements Castle at the CRTC. So for us, that's two big pieces. That's going out and talking to groups like this, educating the industry, trying to do outreach and help people understand their obligations. And then it's also the investigation side of things. So we look into possibilities of non-compliance and we try to get people back on course. My lawyers make me put this in my slides everywhere I go. So, this is not, I'm not speaking from on high here. I'm talking based on our experience. It's not going to be binding or good advice. It's kind of pointers, it's tips. It's all, because it's always, as you guys know, it's always about the facts of the case. And every one of your businesses is different. Every one of your email campaigns is different. So, so hopefully this gives you some good ideas, gives you things to think about. But don't quote me. Okay. So we'll go through kind of how we look at enforcement, a couple of data points from our spam reporting center. We'll talk about what we're trying to do to increase transparency of what we do, help you guys just understand it a little bit more easily. And then we'll go through a couple of recent cases, including the guidance that we put out on Section 9. So, for me, this is a civil regime. I'm not putting people in jail. I want people to do the right thing. I want people to comply with Castle, and I want to help them do that. So that is our ultimate goal. That's all of our activities fall under that umbrella of promoting compliance. So obviously, sessions like this are a big part of that. Talking to groups that are on the ground using email and other digital platforms to do marketing. And to advance their business. We want the Canadian economy to benefit from that dynamism that brings, and really have Canadians have the same opportunities as people in other countries to participate in e-commerce in a safe and secure way. We generally have a pretty open door policy. I thank Matt for saying that we're easy to reach, and I have a bunch of business cards, so I'm happy to add a few of you to my list, my address book today. We do want to be accessible. We want to be able to provide information that's helpful to you in your day-to-day business. We're obviously limited by, not being able to give you binding advice on, yes, this is for sure okay, but we do try to point people in the right direction. And we've added a few things to our website this year to try and increase that and make it a little bit more accessible so you don't necessarily have to get a response from me to move forward. And all those other points are the same. We want to be able to share information with you and with other stakeholders, with government, with other governments, help them understand what we're doing and what the kind of issues are in the Canadian landscape. One thing I did want to point out, we're big proponents. I'm a big believer in compliance, in doing that through undertakings. So if you have concerns, you're allowed to come and just talk to us about them, and we want you to get back on course. Sometimes that's through an undertaking that kind of gives you some pointers of exactly what needs to be rectified. But to me, that's always preferable than having to go to a more disruptive enforcement action. I think it's still, it continues to be a learning curve for everybody. It's only been 4 years. There's not that many pieces of legislation of this scope that are that new. So everybody, to me, we're learning together, and we're trying to make this as easy for everyone to comply as possible. So just a little snapshot of stuff out of the SRC. So obviously starting July 2014 when the law came into force, email still bothers people, spam still bothers people. We get like 25,000 complaints a month on average. So, and this is, to my mind, using not always the easiest or most evident way to report. We don't have integration into email clients or anything like that that would make it kind of one-click thing. People are spending time to do this. So to me, that means it's still an issue for Canadians. We still have a ways to go to get where we want to be. Looking just at the kind of submissions that we get, obviously, email is still the big winner. And has been every year since coming into force. SMS and other text messages are on the rise. As we see marketing move into other channels and other platforms, people kind of have the same idea in their mind that they should be in control of what they're getting on their phone, in their inbox, or whatever it happens to be. In terms of why people file complaints, it has not changed since 2014. It's all about consent. Everybody, rightly or wrongly, they're submitting a complaint to us because they don't feel they consented to receive it. This isn't obviously, these are not validated numbers. We have not gone through and had that back and forth with the sender in each case to say, what is your record of consent? But these are Canadians' perceptions, and I think, to me that's still really important. So sometimes you have incidents where people have given their email address, they don't necessarily understand or they don't remember that you were going to use it to send them commercial messages, or they don't know that you're allowed to based on a business relationship. So it's things to think about in terms of making sure that the consent that you get is informed, that people understand how you're going to use their email address, that it might not just be the receipt from your purchase, it might also be a coupon down the road or a monthly newsletter or what have you. So as I mentioned, for us, outreach is very important. Education, helping people to understand what they need to do to comply, that's a big part of how I spend my days, how my team spends their time. So we're out at sessions like this. We try to kind of crisscross the country and get to all the different regions every year to make sure that people have the latest guidance that's available to them. We're also trying to get more information online, obviously, on our beautiful government website, which is not always the easiest to navigate, and I promise that that's not my responsibility. But we started to put summaries of our investigations up there, so as soon as the notice of violation goes out, we'd have a summary of what the factors were that we thought about. So why did this case come up? What was the issue for us? Because we want to get that information to people right away and not necessarily wait for, a lengthy review process. We also put up a dashboard in December, just kind of showing some statistics on complaints we received, enforcement actions that we took, and other issues that we see out in the marketplace. And finally, our FAQs, which, to be honest, were a little bit out of date. A lot of work was done right after coming into force to really try and deal with the giant tidal wave of questions we were getting. We wanted to make sure those were still applicable and that they were responding to the types of questions that we're getting now. So we didn't take anything off, but we added a great deal of questions and answers based on the stuff that folks like you are sending in to us through our client services team, based on questions we get at sessions like this one. So I do think we're getting to a point where there is lots of information available. Trying to do our best to make sure that it's easy to find, but hopefully that stuff is helpful. To me, the education, the stakeholder awareness piece is still a work in progress. So, we heard that when we went to parliamentary committee in 2017. I've been interested in your feedback. How do you want to receive information like this? Are the sessions? Have you been to other sessions like this? So if we can chat over lunch, I'd be happy to hear your experience. We don't want to hide this stuff. We want to make sure that it's out there and as easy to get as possible. One last thing just on that is that we are trying to move out past the messaging space. So that obviously involves different kinds of industries, different businesses. So we're trying to get out to them too, people that might not be as familiar with Castle as folks in the email marketing game are. So just quickly, I'll run through a couple of cases that we put out this year. I realize this is an email event. This was an SMS marketing case that we concluded early in 2018. And basically they were kind of, striking out on all fronts. They had a list of numbers that they did not have consent for. They weren't including identification information, and they weren't allowing people to unsubscribe. I mean, they were selling, Montreal Canadiens tickets and Toronto Maple Leafs tickets, so everybody wants those, but people didn't necessarily want to be receiving those text messages. And so what we did here, again, like I mentioned earlier, we reached out to that company. We talked to them about what we saw as the issues with their business practice. and we negotiated an undertaking with them to bring them into compliance. Now, often those undertakings do have a monetary payment attached to them in recognition of the non-compliance. In this case, we tried giving, rather than putting all the money to the Receiver General, and that's important to note, it doesn't go to us, to my program or to me, we sent a lot of it out to their customers to say, you've been bothered or annoyed by this marketing practice. So as part of their remedy for that, they're giving out coupons to their customers to make sure that the people that are left, that are still on their list with consent, can benefit a little bit from their kind of rehabilitation. And then in the summer, we concluded our first Section 8 and Section 9 cases, which, for those of you not aware, Section 8 is about the installation of software without consent. Section 9 is a prohibition on the facilitation of violations. So here we had two Canadian ad service providers. They ran a bidding platform and an ad network. And our concern, the investigation that we ran, uncovered that they were not doing a great job at vetting their clients. So anybody could be signing up for their ad network and pushing ads out through their platforms. And lots of those ads, or some of those ads, were infected. They were malicious ads. So we were seeing occasions of installation of malware in Canada that were all routing through this ad network and the service provider. Those cases are currently under review before the Commission, so hopefully later this year we'll get a little bit of guidance on how the Commission itself interprets these sections of the legislation and these particular factual circumstances. And that'll all be up on the site once the decision is rendered. That brings us to Section 9. So following that case, we wanted to make sure that we could put more guidance out into the marketplace, and Section 9 was a part of the law that many people were not familiar with. Basically, it says what it says up there on the screen: you can't facilitate or aid in the commission of a violation, and if you do, then that is also a violation. So we published an information bulletin the Commission did of their interpretation of that section, how it applies to whom, and went through a few examples of circumstances where that could be engaged. For us, we wanted to make sure that it was well understood. Fundamentally, Castle captures the entire supply chain in electronic marketing or electronic communications. So I know that can be a little bit daunting or frightening, but those obligations are in the law, so we wanted to make sure that people understood what that meant for them practically. We do feel like there is a lot of a good level of compliance in Canadian business. They do understand the risks that that e-marketing and e-commerce present to their businesses. So this is just a really reminder from us to say, you need to do that risk assessment on your business. The internet is full of various threats. You guys all know that. Canadians know that. So you need to really evaluate your business practices and say, are there areas where I could minimize risk? Because fundamentally, that risk also represents a liability under Castle, and we want to be able to, stop that minority of companies that are brazenly allowing things to happen over their infrastructure or their services. So that's not the majority of people. I think most of corporate Canada is moving in the right direction. It understands with GDPR and Castle and other statutes that there's an increased requirement on them to really be rigorous in their communications with their customers, rigorous in their information security and the management of their networks. I think the message there is just that, we can't just be collecting money from our customers and ignoring how that happens. So you have to look also at service providers that you're doing business with and make sure that they have a good program in place to ensure that they're compliant. Fundamentally, it's the same as our general approach to corporate compliance. It's about due diligence. So it's about documenting your procedures, ensuring that when you're getting consent, you're keeping a record of it, and that you have those systems in place to train your staff to deal with gaps or failures in your systems, and to remediate those. I mean, I think it gets a little bit more complicated when we're talking about software installation and more technical online businesses. For email marketers like yourselves, it really is about making sure you have consent, making sure people have an easy way to get in touch with you, and withdraw that consent, and making sure that people understand how you're going to use their information, their email address, how you're going to contact them. On this one too, in terms of implementation, I don't have an infinite team. Like I said, we're going to try and focus on people that are really, way off sides. But if you have concerns about how this applies to your business or your particular niche, then I encourage you to come and talk to us. We do go through in the bulletin, which is on our site, 2018-415. We do go through a couple of examples about email service providers, online software distributors. And we talk about the kind of things that you need to be paying attention to, the level of control that you might have over the potential for a violation by one of your service providers, and how close you are to that. So obviously, if you're just, the example we give in the bulletin, if you're just selling someone a computer, you're not responsible for, if they use that to infect someone else's machine. But if you're giving people an email list that doesn't have proper consent, and you're building them email templates that have no unsubscribe and no real easy ability to add an unsubscribe, well then you're in a situation where you might be providing the tools that are kind of facilitating their non-compliance with CASL. So in terms of what's next, as I said, we're trying to move out beyond messaging. We're trying to get to more malicious activity that happens online through e-commerce in Canada. We've heard that from stakeholders that that's what they're concerned about. So that's going to be a big part of our efforts. We continue to try and educate people using email marketing, help them understand their obligations, help them benefit from our recent cases to improve their practices, and to continue to promote compliance as really the best way to increase the effectiveness of your marketing. I mean, I think we saw at the parliamentary review some really good data on read rates and open rates in Canada going up. And I do think CASL has a lot to do with that. People are inundated with information, inundated with marketing messages. So to the extent that they feel like they have a bit of agency there, they have some control over what they're getting in their inbox. That gives them comfort and makes them feel more inclined to actually look at it. Let's see if I missed anything here. I mean, I think, I'm happy to take questions. I think the only other thing I'd say is, we did a big project this year sending out letters to corporations that we were concerned about their level of compliance. So we looked through the Spam Reporting Center and we identified some clusters of issues, and we talked to big Canadian corporations about that. Like really big, really sophisticated, and there was kind of basic stuff that was still offsides. Your unsubscribe link going to a broken page or to a maintenance required page. Your unsubscribe using, taking, 4 or 5 clicks to get to the person actually being able to unsubscribe. The example I mentioned earlier about, taking an email address to deliver the receipt and then using that as a marketing channel. So there are areas that require different remedies, but they're pretty basic concepts, and I think, so we've sent out a bunch of letters to people and we've had great feedback. I do think that in general the community is really great in Canada. Everybody wants to get on side. But it's just a good reminder to go back and really go through your first principles and make sure that from the bottom up your system is putting Canadians in control and allowing them to make those decisions.
Great, we got lots of time for questions, so. The walking mic's not working, so you just
go ahead.
CRTC do you proactively audit Canadian-based marketers, or is your audit process purely through that SRC complaint reporting system, and is that integrated with any Canadian-based ISPs?
So the question was about whether we do proactive audits or whether we're relying on complaints submitted by Canadians. most of our investigations stem from complaints submitted by Canadians. We have access to other, a couple other spam traps and feeds and stuff like that we use for context and to understand scope in the landscape and stuff like that. But no, generally people complain to us. Ultimately there are so many people doing email marketing in Canada, it would be quite a challenge to try and proactively even go out and spot check. But we do, that's why we do these sessions, is to try and reach those other companies that maybe aren't necessarily on our radar right now. And no, there's not any specific integration with ISPs. I mean, we're the telecom regulator also, so we tend to talk with the ISPs and the TSPs quite a bit. So sometimes they see things on their network, they want to talk to us about what that's doing to what the effects of those activities are, but in general, we're looking to Canadians to tell us when there's practices that they're concerned about.
Two of the last investigations resulted in undertakings without any monetary penalty. Could you maybe just address what CRTC is thinking? I'm specifically talking about Ancestry.com and Blacklock Reporter. It looked like Blacklock Reporter, the transgressions were significant, and I was surprised to see no AMP with it, but
yeah, so those are they're great examples, and thank you for the question. If people couldn't hear, we're asking about recent undertakings where there was no monetary penalty associated. I think it's a good question because they're very different. So I think, in Ancestry's case, as we noted in the materials we published online, they were, proactively contacted us to talk about compliance concerns. And they, right from the get-go, were really willing to play ball. We were talking with head office in Dublin, council over there, and they wanted to get on side and they wanted to make sure that we understood that they were, moving in that direction. So I think that was a lot of the rationale for, we didn't see a need for an additional penalty to promote compliance. Blackhawks is a different case. I mean, we're talking there about a really, really small business. So, 2 full-time employees, a couple of freelance staff, run out of someone's home. In those kind of situations, again, it's all about what's going to get people to compliance. And, the financial burden of a monetary penalty over and above the costs that we were basically imposing on them to become compliant, that was a concern for us. We wanted the business to spend their money improving their systems, ensuring that they were robust and able to handle consent and unsubscribe, rather than putting money in the consolidated revenue fund. So like I said, undertakings for us can always be a really productive way to have a conversation about compliance and to get to kind of a mutually beneficial outcome.
How connected, if at all, are you to kind of lesson model from CanSpam? Are there, especially with Canadian companies either doing business for American companies or vice versa, how either connected or integrated is that, and is there any advice for people that are doing those cross-border business?
So the question was about US and CanSpam and the integration of our activities. I mean, CanSpam is either awful or it's great, right, depending on your perspective. I'm in the awful camp. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. We talk with the FTC a lot. They're like one of our closest partners. Ultimately, I think from a sender perspective, obviously Castle is more onerous, it's more rigorous. So I think if you're compliant with Castle, then you're in great shape. Technically, if you're just sending to Americans, you could only comply with CanSpam. I would recommend, a proactive compliance for consumer benefit and reach and all that stuff. But the requirements of Castle kick in for when you're sending to Canadians. So we try to keep them informed of what we're doing, what we're seeing in the marketplace. They do the same for us. We do cooperate at certain times on enforcement activities to make sure that everybody's getting the same message from government, BG.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay. Which a lot of this speaks to the consumer, direct to consumer, what about business or affiliated services? Because the lines are a little more blurred and can be interpreted differently. So, curious about that.
Yeah, I think just in terms of the question was about marketing to business. The vast majority of what we see in terms of complaints are from consumers. We do get a few that come in relative to business communication. I think on the business side, the requirements still apply unless you can show that you have an existing business relationship or if there's some sort of relationship to kick in the B2B exemption. It doesn't right now seem to be as big of an issue. I don't know if it's people don't feel the same way about their business email as they do about their personal or what it is, but definitely for us the consumer piece is more prominent, and so that's where we tend to focus most of our energies.
Is there any opportunity in the future that senders or email service providers would be able to spot check their own domains and IP addresses against the spam complaint data that you have? I know it's that you're doing it right now, but do you see an opportunity where it might go in that direction where senders are able to help proactively kind of proactively do that research on behalf of their senders?
That's a good one. I don't think I've gotten that question before. So could you come in and kind of get a sense of what is in the SRC that relates to your domains or your IPs or? I'd have to think about that a little bit. I mean, I think the only issue we have is in our ability to share any personal information, obviously, that is submitted as part of complaints. But if we're talking about your IPs and your domains, I think there's probably a way that we could at least give you a sense of what we see in there, at least at a bit of an aggregated level, not necessarily complaint by complaint. But we always, that was my message right at the beginning, was we want people to come in and talk to us and be proactive. So we'd be happy to take a look at that and figure out what we can do that would help you.
The follow-up to that story and the recent question is coming from the German space. There is more integration with the German ISPs and the federal government in this regard with respect to the reconciliation of this data, to Kevin's point, which is mutually beneficial for both sides. And it ultimately cracks down on those behaviors a lot more, and therefore senders are more in line with what you're trying to promote in the first place.
Oh, totally agree. And I think Germany's in the enviable position of having one, monopoly, former monopoly telco, as being big in the space. We have a bit of a different challenge here, and we also have the fact that we do regulate those entities, so we don't always see eye to eye, but.
So just as maybe a follow-up or another comment, as service providers, occasionally you end up with a bad apple where someone signs up an account fraudulently, especially with sort of the MTA and the cloud type services. Are there things as an industry or as a group we could provide more insight into, like account terminations for violations that would be interesting, account terminations for phishing, things like that, is there a channel that we could, besides just reaching out to you personally, because I know you don't necessarily have time for all that kind of stuff, but as industry groups or associations supply that type of information, and maybe not today, but think about how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a small intel team that they look through the SRC. They kind of do their quantitative analysis on what comes in. They look at the other feeds too, and they try to integrate that into a picture of what the landscape looks like. So stuff from service providers to say, we see this X issue, we see phishing, we saw it out of this account, or they were using these domains to do it. Like that kind of information is really helpful for us, and so it can definitely put you in touch with the right people at the commission that could look through that and use that and figure out if it's viable. I think the challenge for the really malicious stuff is that people are bouncing around so quickly that even data that's a few days old is often not actionable, but it still helps us get a picture of what's happening, which service providers that they're using. We see commonalities on the hosting side. where are those domains being hosted? They tend to crop up a few names over and over again. And again, that goes back to the Section 9 stuff about understanding who your clients are. And if you're, if people are signing up and they're, it's Krusty the Clown is using your domain service, Krusty might be doing some bad stuff. So, but yeah, if there's stuff that you see that concerns you, we are always happy to receive that and figure out how it fits in with the rest of our data. And if it's something that we could use on a longer term, then we definitely want to have a discussion about that.
7 more, 8 more minutes.
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm just wondering how effective Castle is being and how, over the last couple of years, are you pleased with where they are now? Is it where you want to be, and how do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, great question. Is Castle effective? I'll defer to the Minister of Industry on that one. No, I mean, I do think it's effective. I think you see, and we saw testimony before the Indian Committee that since 2013, 2014, or since 2010 when the law was actually passed, we have seen an improvement in unsolicited communications in Canada. I think, we benefit from a bit of a smaller e-commerce industry in Canada. So it's made it a little bit easier to get the message out, to get people on board. And I think, you see it in the SRC data. I talked about the warning letters we were sending out to, big, top tier brands about issues they have. But still, we're definitely seeing the barometer move more towards malicious, illegitimate companies, individuals that are winding up in the SRC. So I think, to me, that's the best evidence that we have that, we're getting less frequency and less volume about, big, reputable marketing companies and retailers. So I do think that we're in a better place than we are now. I mean, the challenge is just that the barriers to entry are zero. So every day there's new companies popping up, and to me, that's still the piece that we have a challenge on, is those really small businesses. A mom and pop shop is not going to be that sophisticated. They're not necessarily going to know all the different hoops they have to jump through and all the different rules they have to comply with. So that's still a challenge from our point of view of how do we get to those people? How do we make it easy? How do we make them understand, that it can be as basic as a little spreadsheet tracking who signed up for their list and when they unsubscribed if they did.
So you mentioned that you have about 25,000 complaints a month. So we investigate each one of them, and what would be the process?
Yes.
Do you want to finish? So we get 25,000 complaints a month. Do we investigate each one? Yes. No. Not always. So, we obviously, this is undermining my own presentation here. Obviously, if we get 1,000 complaints, 100 complaints about a specific sender, a specific campaign, that's rising to the top. But we also, the exercise I was talking about earlier, we went in, those weren't necessarily getting, 1,000 complaints. But there was enough that it kind of raised flags for us, and we dug a little deeper to, validate whether the unsubscribe was working, test the issue that the consumer had raised in their complaint, and then send some information out to the company to help them be aware of that. We also have, as I mentioned, the folks that really work on the SRC that are in there every single day. They're really great at, highlighting for us what they see in terms of trending, what they see in terms of areas of priority. So we're not looking at every single one, but definitely through the automated tools that we have and through the analysis that we do, we're covering a broad swath of what's in there. So if you're a legitimate marketer in Canada and people are complaining about you, we probably know about it.
I would just, based on some of the reports that I've seen, some of the undertakings, some of them have published, it's as minimal as 10 spam trap hits and 100 user complaints. So you don't have to get thousands of complaints to bubble to the top. You just have to be doing enough stuff that makes you noticed, then you get looked at a little hard. So I think that's where we've seen some of the bigger brands that have received undertakings or amps or things like that. Is they're maybe not, they're maybe not receiving tens of thousands of complaints or even thousands of complaints, but even as little as 100 complaints could put you in that top slot to bring the microscope at least to your direction.
And I'm sure Neil can't say it, but the ones who don't cooperate seem to be the ones who get actually fined, and they're not undertakings, they're actual violations. So the more cooperative you are, and it sounds like your answer for the ancestry and Blacklock was very compassionate. So, you're not looking to put people out of business, you're looking to have them come into compliance, and your actions are saying that. So I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we want the most people in compliance. So
Right.
sometimes, as Matt and Derek said, it's not always about the number of complaints. Sometimes it's about your business. So if you're a market leader, we might expect a little bit more of you. Discussing compliance with you in one form or another could have a lot of kind of knock-on effects in your segment, in your line of business. And that's important for us because ultimately we gotta pick and choose what investigations we're gonna undertake, and we want to get the biggest bang for our buck. We're trying to use Canadians' money wisely and get the effect for them that the law was intended to provide.
That might be a good one. How are you funded?
By taxpayers like you.
So the fines don't go to CRTC, the fines go to Canada Revenue.
Yeah.
And they have to apply to the treasurer for their annual budgets to enforce Castle.
Yeah, and I do think administrative monetary penalties are effective. They are they're a proven tool for compliance. But my personal goal is not to issue as many amps as I can in a year. I don't think that that's productive.
So you don't get paid a bonus for that.
Talk to the minister about that next time.
I want to thank Neil for joining us today. Neil, it was fantastic. Thank you very much. Please help yourself.